Outdoor sampling. 2 outdoor samples. The inspector shall perform 2 outdoor samples of the highest quality general air to be used as control samples or background samples. These samples need to be used for comparison with the indoor samples. So you're required to take 2 outdoor samples. Take the outdoor samples upon arrival. The outdoor sampling should begin soon after arriving to the property, while the weather conditions are favorable. It's better for an inspector to perform the outdoor sampling while the weather is favorable than to wait after the visual examination, because the visual examination, which may include surface sampling, could take hours. The outdoor conditions could change drastically during the examination and sampling of the building interior. The weather. Air sampling should not be conducted during unusually severe storms or periods of unusually high winds. Severe weather will affect the sampling and analysis results in several ways. First, a wind will increase the variability of airborne spore concentrations because wind-induced differences in air pressures between the building interior and the exterior occur. Second, the rapid changes in barometric pressure increase the chance of a large difference in the interior and exterior air pressures, consequently changing the rate of airborne spores being sucked into the building. Clean and calm. The weather conditions should be clean and calm. Calm, there shouldn't be any winds. Well, any severe winds. And clean, you shouldn't be taking outdoor samples near a construction site. Don't take air samples when someone's cutting the lawn. Don't take air samples when there's wind carrying a lot of dirt and dust in the air. It should be clean and calm. High winds affect the sampling. No rain. Air pump sampling should not take place outdoors if it's raining. If possible, wait a few hours, do the interior visual examination and surface sampling first, then come back, and hopefully the weather conditions would have changed. Don't take outdoor air samples during a rainstorm. Wait at least 2 hours, maybe, after the rain stops. Alterations or adjustments to the normal procedure or locations of taking air samples, particularly the control samples, the outdoor samples, must be recorded down somewhere in your log book, your work ledger, or the chain of custody. Above freezing. Air pump sampling should not take place when the outdoor air temperature is 32 degrees or below. Air sampling should take place when the air temperature is above freezing. No snow covering. Air sampling should not have any snow covering. Air sampling should not take place when there is a snow cover. Now, it's your call, it's your discretion about a dusting of snow. Snow covering affects outdoor samples, so you don't want any snow covering. 10 minutes. On a clean, windless day, air pump sampling should run for 10 minutes, but be sure to refer to the manufacturer's recommendation of that sampling device. When the outdoor air is something other than clean and windless, then the time of the sampling should be reduced to maybe 5 minutes. Or if the outdoor air condition isn't clean or calm, it's dirty and a little bit windy, reduce it even more. But ideally, those are the last things you should be doing, reducing the time. Ideally, 10 minutes, clean and calm weather, above freezing. No rain, no snow. Location. If possible, one outdoor sample should be located on the windward side of the building. That's facing the point from which the wind blows. That's the windward side. And one should be on the leeward side, the sheltered side. So let's say you have a house, and the wind is coming from the right. Take an outdoor sampling Here, this is the windward side, and the wind will go over the house like that. And this is a sheltered area, so take an outdoor sampling here on the leeward side. Windward side, leeward side, windward side, facing the wind, leeward side, not facing the wind. If you can't have two sides of a house, let's say you are doing a townhouse where there's the house is 24 feet wide, front wall, 2 stories, you can't even get in the back. Take one in the front, near the front door, near the front entry, about 10 feet away. It doesn't matter, if it's on the leeward side or the windward side. You try to do the best as possible. And it's really at your discretion and at your direction. And face the instrument facing the wind. You want to capture the spores that are floating on the gentle breeze that's coming towards you on the windward side, and have that device sample the air that's coming through. If it's hanging down, that's not very good. It's up in the air. If it's away from the wind, that's not good. So the windward side sample should be pointing right in the direction from where the wind is blowing. The sample should be taken with one of these. Here's my air pump and my tripod sampling device. Should be taken about 3 to 6 feet from the ground, breathing area, breathing space. And if you're trained in radon testing, it's quite similar. That breathing space, you want it in there somewhere. Don't put it on a rock on the ground outside. Don't put it on the mailbox either. Something controlled. So invest in a tripod. It comes usually with the air pump. And it's typically about 10 feet away from the entry door. The idea is to have both outdoor samples located in areas where the device will collect a representative sampling of the air that may enter the building through an entry door or a nearby window or vent. 10 feet. Remember that. 10 feet is used a lot. 10 feet away from the entry door or window. If there's a main ventilation component of the building that draws into the building fresh air from outside, the sampling should be performed about 10 feet away from that intake. The sampling should be performed at least 10 feet from the most frequently used entrance in the home, the front door. The air sampling devices should be kept at least 10 feet away from all openings, air intakes, registers, exhaust fans, vent pipes, ventilation fans, etc. The dryer should be far away from the dryer vent because there's so much lint. That doesn't bring a lot of clean air near your sampling device. And nothing overhead. Don't take an outdoor sample when there's something above you. Don't be in a carport. Don't be underneath the overhang where the soffit is, soffit vents, or the eaves. Don't be under a tree, under a bush. Don't be under a shed roof of some kind. You want to be able to take a nice, good, representative sampling of the general air. We're at a residential home, and we're going to perform a complete mold inspection, which requires a visual examination of the entire building and mold sampling and any moisture measurements that you may take inside. And you can also do relative humidity and temperature measurements. So upon arrival, I like to take my air samples on the outside. And according to the IAC2 mold inspection standards of practice, we take 2 air samples on the outside and at least 1 air sample on the inside. If there's a HVAC system on the inside, there's another sample. So that's at least 4 air samples we're going to take. So upon arrival, I like to take my outdoor samples, 1 in front of the house. There's no wind today, so we don't know what's windward or leeward. So let's take 1 at the front of the house and 1 in the back of the house. And how I do that is get my sampling box, So I'm all set up to take my first air sample, and I'm going to use the Aerocell cassette. I've got my tripod here, and I've calibrated my pump this morning before I got to the inspection. You should do your calibrations every day. And the first step is to take the seal off of the backside or bottom of the Aerocell and retain it for later use. And I'm going to install it with the tube. And then I'm going to get in my approximate location. I want to be near the front entry, maybe about 10 feet or so away. And I'm going to set my cassette possibly in the windward direction, towards windward. And I've got it connected to the tube, and I'm all ready to go. So I'm going to take the front seal off and retain it for later use so we can seal it back up. Now the cassette is exposed. I've got it calibrated for Aerocell. It's 15 liters per minute. It's right on the money. And I'm also going to record the time. And for Aerocell on the outdoor sample in a clean and calm environment is 10 minutes. So we're going to let that run for 10 minutes. Okay, so 10 minutes is up. Turn off the pump. Reseal the top part, or the inlet side. Make sure it's sealed up. Remove the tube from the back side. Nope, there we go. And seal the bottom side or the back side. And then make my recordings in the chain of custody document, or if I'm using a work log book, record the time and the volume and the amount of air and the location, and also, most importantly, the unique identification of the cassette. So that's the first air sample. We're required to take 2. So let's go on the other side of the house and take another one. Okay, we're doing the second air sample that's required on the outside of the house. I've chosen the back side of the house. This is the back side of the house, and just for fun, for the video itself, we're going to use a different kind of sample. You are required to use the same air sampling device on all of your air samples. But just so we could see what the results are for different cassettes, we're going to use the Z5. This is a relatively new sampling device, and what's neat about Z5 is it's quick. 5 liters per minute, so it's a slow airflow rate, and for 5 minutes, so it's a short sampling time. And I've calibrated my pump for 5 liters per minute, and the first step is to open it up, the bottom side, take off the bottom cap. A lot easier than the Aerocell, in my opinion, because they have these nice little caps. And we're in the good position, about 10 feet away from the house, at head height, and take off the front. So we're exposed, and we kick on the pump and double check just to make sure it's at 5 liters per minute. It is. Makes a little hissing sound, so we know it's sucking air, and we'll just time it for 5 minutes. Okay, it's been 5 minutes. We're going to turn off the pump. Air sampling is done. Put on the front cap. Take off the unit. Put on the bottom cap. And we're ready to go. It's sunny today in Colorado, so I don't want to store this on my dashboard in my truck. In between 50 degrees and 80 degrees is where you should store this sampling device. So that's 2 air samples we've taken on the outside. We're required to take additional air samples on the inside depending upon the condition and if there's an HVAC system installed. We're going to perform the visual inspection and looking for areas of concern, which is, there's 5 of them: moisture intrusion, water damage, musty odors, apparent visible mold growth, and conditions conducive to that mold growth. So let's take a look inside and outside, perform a non-invasive visual examination, and then perform our additional air samples and possibly surface samples. So we've performed the visual inspection throughout the house, looking for areas of concern. And I am a fan of technology and using software because you can write your report as you go along doing your visual examination of the building. And if you use a Pocket PC, you can write your report as you're going along and select things such as we have an HVAC system installed. And according to the IEC2 Standards of Practice, we need to take an air sample to test the AC system. If there's an HVAC system and there's a mold problem inside the house, this is a way that those mold spores can be distributed throughout the building. And we need to confirm or deny that there is an excessive level of mold spores coming out of the supply register when the system is turned on. So what we want to do is turn on the unit and let the unit run, the HVAC system run for about 15 minutes, and then take an air sample and direct that air sampling device towards the supply register. And you can choose any one. Ideally, you would choose about 3. 3 is really good to have sampling devices throughout the building, but typically your client will only pay for 1. So choose 1 and then turn on the system and take an air sample there. So I'm going to mark this in my report. I'm using my Pocket PC, and I'm using HomeGauge. HomeGauge is a software company. They make a great software to do home inspections, commercial inspections, and mold inspections. And they have some narratives and templates that you could use to do your mold inspection. And we've gone through the building looking for areas of concern. I've been writing my report. We haven't found any areas of concern. Those 5: moisture intrusion, water damage, musty odors, apparent mold growth, or conditions conducive to mold growth. So we do have an HVAC system. I'm marking it here. I'll show you some screenshots in the video. And I'm going to mark the location where we're going to take the sample. And let's take an air sample. So we're required to take an air sample for the HVAC system. Here it is here. And at the supply side, and also at the supply side, while you're taking samples and doing your visual examination, you're looking at the condition of the register itself, actually looking for mold growth, apparent mold growth, or signs of moisture intrusion, including condensation. There isn't anything here. So let's take an air sample. We are going to use the Micro 5 PosiTrack, and what we do is open the bottom of it, attach it to the tube. PosiTrack Micro 5 is designed for 5 liters per minute. I've calibrated my pump for 5 liters and take the seal off the front and retain it for later use to put it back on. And the cassette or device, sampling device, is directed towards the air supply, and the system is operational. We want airflow coming out of here. We don't take the sample. We wait 15 minutes before taking the sample. We don't take the sample before or after it shuts down or turns on. We want it during, and give it about 15 minutes to turn on. I like to turn it on in heat mode so that the ductwork expands a little bit, and possibly we can agitate some of the ducts and have maybe, if there's any mold spores, come out of the ducts. So it's blowing out and it's sucking in. I open up the seal. Let's turn it on. Micro 5 goes for 5 minutes on the inside of the house, 10 minutes on the outside. On the inside, 5 minutes, and it's calibrated at 5 liters per minute. So we'll let that run. You can hear on the Micro 5 a little sucking sound, so we know it's working. So we'll let that run for 5 minutes. What we can do, and what's allowed, and actually is recommended, is to agitate the ductwork. So let's go down and give the ductwork a little bump, come back up here, and stop it. And we're allowed to give it a little bump agitate it. And so I'm just going to give a little bump up here. See a little dust down here. And this is the supply duct to that supply register. And that's about it. That's all you want to do. You just want to agitate it a little bit, maybe to get those mold spores going, or at least that dust moving, and then supplying our air sampling device. And I'm using HomeGauge's software again, and I've got a little mark here for air sampling and agitating the ductwork. And it's a good way to keep records of what you did during the mold inspection. Okay, that's been 5 minutes. We gave the ductwork a little bump to agitate it, see if there's any mold spores coming out. It's been 5 minutes. Let's turn off the pump. Let's put the seal back on the inlet side. Let's take off the tube and put the cap on. This is ready to be stored and then mailed later to your laboratory. And using HomeGauge's software in my Pocket PC, I can record when I stopped the time, the sampling's done, and I've sealed it up, and we can move on. When you take an indoor air sampling, you should have closed house conditions or closed building conditions. It's very similar to doing a radon test. Closed building conditions. Indoor air sampling should be made under closed building conditions. They are necessary for you to stabilize the air that may contain mold spores or MVOCs, and to increase the reproducibility of the air sampling and measurement. Windows on all levels and exterior doors should be kept closed except during normal entry and exit. During the sampling period, normal entry and exit include a brief opening and closing of a door, but to the extent possible, exterior doors should not be left open for more than a few minutes. So try to keep everything closed. Normal operation of permanently installed energy recovery ventilators, also known as heat recovery ventilators or air-to-air heat exchangers, may also continue during closed building conditions. In houses where permanent radon mitigation systems have been installed, these systems should be operating and functioning normally during the sampling period. Closed building conditions will generally exist as normal living conditions in northern areas of the country when the average daily temperature is low enough so that the windows and doors are kept closed. Depending on the geographical area, this can be from late fall to early spring. HVAC. If there's an HVAC system in the building, take an air sample. At least one air sampling should be taken at the air supply register of the HVAC system. It's preferred to sample prior and during the operation of the HVAC system, but if only one sampling can be performed, then the sampling should be taken 15 minutes after you turn on the circulating fan. You want to know if there's mold contamination on the interior ducts, and when that blower turns on, let it run for a little bit and then take an air sample right at that supply register. So if there's an HVAC system, take at least one air sample. Ideally, there would be at least 3 sampling devices at the HVAC system, similarly situated. But financial or time constraints may limit the number of samples that can be taken. Location. The air sample should be taken about 3 to 5 feet from an air supply register with the sampling device oriented so that the air from the supply register directly enters the sampling device, somewhat similar to taking an outdoor sample on the windward side of a building. You want that air to be directed right into your sampling device. Agitation. It is recommended that a gentle or vigorous mechanical agitation of the ductwork, maybe a bump or a shake, is appropriate. So what I do is I'm set up in front of an air supply register. I usually can only have my client pay me for one air supply sampling. Ideally, there'd be 3 or 4 distributed throughout the house. Turn on the HVAC system. I like to turn on the heat. Gets things expanding. The ductwork expands, maybe produces some things. I want the worst case scenario, actually. Turns on, circulator fan turns on. Wait a few minutes. 15 minutes is good, no more than that. And then start your sampling according to the sampling procedures. Open up your cassette. If you're doing an air sample, have it positioned at the supply, oriented right towards where the air is coming in, and do your 10 minutes. Agitate the ductwork to make sure if there are any mold spores, get them going so you can sample them. Indoor air. Take 1 air sample, at least 1 air sample. The inspector shall perform at least 1 indoor air sample. Additional samples may be performed at the discretion of the inspector. Take at least 1 air sample near the center of each room or area of the building in which there are areas of concern, which are moisture intrusion, water damage, musty odors, visible apparent mold growth, or conditions conducive to mold growth. Take at least 1 air sample in the center of each room or area that has those areas of concern. Now, let's say you have no areas of concern. Take at least 1 indoor air sample in the most lived-in common room, such as the family room or the living room or the entertainment room. I try to pick the biggest room. Now, these large mansions usually have a big family area, couches, sofas, TV, fireplace, chimney stack, cathedral ceiling. That's a great place. Take an air sample if you don't have any areas of concern. The location shall be determined at the discretion of the inspector. Location. An indoor air sampling should only take place in a livable space of the building. Sampling in areas such as closets, underfloor crawl spaces, unfinished attic spaces, unless you're doing a limited mold inspection, then you can go into that specific area. Storage or utility rooms or inside the HVAC system is not recommended. The indoor air sample should be taken in the middle or center of the area or room. The air collection device should be at head height, about 3 to 6 feet. And 10 minutes. Inside the building, air pump sampling should run for 10 minutes. If there's a lot of indoor activity, then the air pump sampling needs to be reduced in time to maybe 5 minutes. If there's an active source of dust, such as cleaning going on, vacuuming, light construction, then the air sampling time should be reduced. Be sure to follow the recommendations, however, of the manufacturer of the sampling device or collector for the time and airflow. Limitations and exclusions. These standards of practice apply only to residential buildings with 4 or fewer dwelling units. The mold inspection is not a warranty, guarantee, or insurance policy. The inspection is not technically exhaustive. The mold inspection will not identify concealed or latent conditions or defects. The mold inspection will not identify mold growth, not readily visible at the time of the inspection. The scope of a mold inspection does include future conditions or events. The scope of a mold inspection does not include hidden mold growth or future mold growth. Those things need to be told to your client. Let's go over some of the things that you're not required to do. You're not required to report the condition of any system or component that is not readily accessible. Not required to report any system or component that's not in the IAC2 standards of practice. You don't have to report the size, capacity, BTU, performance, efficiency of any component or system. You don't have to be reporting compliance with codes, regulations, or installed guidelines or manufacturer's recommendations. Don't have to look for the evidence of rodents, animals, insects, wood-destroying insects, pests, mites, cockroaches. That's indoor air quality. A mold inspection is not an indoor air quality inspection. You're not required to determine the presence of hidden mold by physical examination or sampling. You have to inform your client that there may be areas of hidden mold that we cannot see, and this is a non-invasive visual examination and sampling. Don't need to report replacement or repair cost estimates. The world of remediation of mold is well handled by other professionals. You don't have to lift carpeting or padding. You don't have to inspect other environmental issues. Radon is part of indoor air quality. Don't have to inspect radon to do a mold inspection. You don't have to determine the cause or reason of any condition. If you have moisture intrusion, you may perform a thorough professional mold inspection without actually diagnosing the actual source of the moisture problem. Do your best, but leave that up to the professional expert who is going to come in and fix that water problem. You don't have to move any personal items, other inspection obstructions such as, but not limited to, insulation, throw rugs, furniture, floor or wall coverings, ceiling tiles, window coverings, equipment, plants, ice, snow, debris, water, dirt, foliage, appliances. Don't have to move any of that stuff. Don't have to dismantle or open or uncover any system or component. You don't have to enter or access any area, crawl space or attic space, which, in the opinion of the inspector, may be unsafe or may risk personal safety. You don't have to do anything that may be unsafe or dangerous. You don't have to turn anything on that's shut down. You don't have to operate anything that's turned off on purpose. If there is a toilet that is maybe in poor condition, the water has been turned off, be very careful about turning that water on without permission. There may be a reason why that water valve has been turned off. There could be a leak that is not readily visible. The inspector is not required to operate any shutoff, water, or fuel valves or manual stop valves. You don't have to operate any electrical disconnect or overcurrent protection device. During a mold inspection, you don't have to operate any lawn irrigation or sprinkler systems, although it would be very good to get trained in how to do so, because an improperly adjusted sprinkler, lawn sprinkler system, can be a condition conducive to mold growth. If that sprinkler is discharging directly onto the siding of the house, let's say wood siding or brick, holds a lot of moisture. Masonry is the best holder of moisture, has that buffer, hygric buffer. Then that is a condition that's conducive to mold growth. That moisture may move through, wick through the building materials and come in just from that sprinkler system. So if you can turn them on, if you find a course or a class or an instructor to show you how to do irrigation sprinkler system inspections, that would be highly recommended. What is mold? Well, first, in the previous sections of this course, we learned about the two types of mold inspections, complete and limited, and the IAC2 mold inspection standards of practice, and some mold sampling procedures. Well, now let's learn about what mold is. Molds are organisms, microorganisms, that may be found indoors and outdoors. They are a part of the natural environment and play an important role in the environment by breaking down and digesting organic material. Molds are neither plants nor animals. They are part of the kingdom fungi. The diagram demonstrates the position of fungi among other living organisms. Fungi are not plants. You can see in the middle, they're not there. Fungi are not animals, to the left. Fungi belong to a kingdom of their own, on the right. Plants convert carbon dioxide directly into carbohydrates for food. Animals and fungi must find complex carbon in the environment for food. While animals digest the food and degrade it internally, fungi excrete chemicals, enzymes, into the environment that degrade the complex carbon into a soluble form, a nutrient. Fungi do not make their own food the way the green plants do. Fungi get nourishment from other living organisms. The main role of fungi in the ecosystem is to break down dead materials. Dead materials such as leaves, trees, animals, insects, logs that fall on tree branches that fall on the ground you see as you walk through the forest. That's mold. The same enzymes that assist fungi in breaking down dead materials are the same that can be damaging the wooden components of a building. Molds can damage food, stored goods, and building materials in homes. Yeast, mold, mildew, mushroom are terms that are commonly used to refer to fungi. Mold is essentially a description of fungi growing on surfaces. Mold is a surface phenomenon. Like the black substance on a moldy shower curtain. Mold and mildew often refer to the same fungi, but mildew actually, biologically, is different from fungi. So watch your terms. Don't use the terms mold and mildew interactively. They don't mean the same thing, actually. All mold is fungi. Not all fungi is mold. Mold belongs to the kingdom fungi. What do you call a mushroom that walks into a bar and buys drinks for everybody? A fungi. Molds can multiply by producing microscopic spores, very small things that you can't see with your eye, similar to the seeds produced by plants. Many spores are so small that they can easily float through the air and be carried great distances by the gentlest breeze. The number of mold spores suspended in indoor and outdoor air fluctuates from season to season, day to day, even hour to hour. So when you take a mold sampling, it's really for only that moment in time. No one knows how many species of fungi exist, but estimates range from tens of thousands to perhaps hundreds of thousands. Some of the most common indoor molds are Penicillium, Aspergillus, Cladosporium, and Alternaria. Mold is everywhere. Mold spores can be found indoors and outdoors. Mold is ubiquitous. Mold spores cannot be eliminated from the indoor environments. Some mold spores will be found floating through the air and on settled dust. However, they will not grow unless moisture is present. So why be concerned with mold? Mold is not usually a problem indoors in buildings, unless mold spores land on something wet or damp, like a damp spot, and begin to grow. As molds grow, they digest whatever they're growing on. It's one of the reasons to be concerned. Unchecked, mold growth can damage buildings and furnishings. Molds can rot wood. Mold can damage drywall. Mold can eventually cause structural damage to buildings. Mold can cause cosmetic damage, such as stains, to furnishings. The potential health effects to mold are also a concern. It's important, therefore, to prevent mold from growing indoors. There are 3 reasons, basically, to be concerned about fungi growth in the indoor environment. 1, potential health effects of exposure to fungi in the indoor environment and exposure to their byproducts. 2, the effect of fungal contamination to the structural integrity of the building. And 3, the negative aesthetic effects that fungi can produce, both visually and on the human olfactory systems. Although the issue of whether exposure to indoor fungi causes adverse health effects is controversial, there is no doubt that a seriously mold-contaminated building can suffer structural damage and that a foul-smelling, fungus-filled building is just simply aesthetically unpleasing. Controversies about health effects aside, the latter 2 reasons are sufficient to merit a complete mold inspection and remediation when an environment is found to have fungal contamination. People who have concerns about structural damage or the aesthetic effects of indoor fungi should seek the services of a certified mold inspector. People who have concerns about health effects of mold exposure should seek counsel of a healthcare professional who may be guided by the results of a certified mold inspection. Physical characteristics of mold. The structures of fungi vary greatly. Some fungi have rigid cellular walls made of chitin, and chitin is resistant to breakdown as compared to the cellulose that makes up the cellular walls of plants. That's very easy to break down. Spores can survive a very long time in harsh conditions until the environment is suitable for growth. Mold has long thread-like strings of cells called hypha, or hyphae. Hyphae form into a tangled mass called mycelium. The mycelium is the growth that's fuzzy on bread. The strings that grow down into the bread are the mycelium, which is not seen. And the whole fungus body is called a thallus. And spores are produced in very large numbers, and they're located on the hyphae. Fungi grow well in moist, dark areas, but can be found wherever organic material is available. Molds can grow on a wide variety of surfaces, including paint, jet fuel, wallpaper, glass, stainless steel. Moisture is necessary for mold growth. Moisture may come from the air and from material upon which they grow. If the environment becomes very dry, fungi can still survive by going dormant and by producing spores that resist drying out. Fungi can spread via the tiny spores through the air. When a spore lands on a surface that is moist and has material that can be digested for nutrients and food, it germinates and begins to grow, just like putting a seed in good soil. Hyphae grow out of the spores. Some grow up into the air. Spores are produced on the hyphae. They grow upwards above the food material. And then spores can be blown by the wind and spread to new areas. A change in the humidity level can increase spores in the air. A relatively high humidity level can burst moist, swollen cells of the mold body that form spores. This is true for Penicillium and Aspergillus, 2 very common indoor molds. Foot traffic, carpet vacuum, or increased ventilation increases the number of airborne mold spores. Some hyphae grow down into the food material. Cells of the hyphae produce the chemicals, and those chemicals break down the material, the paper, the wood, the fruit, into food that the fungus can absorb. Most of the mold body is that stuff that is buried in the food material and out of sight. Don't just pick off the green thing off your bread, sandwich bread. Most of it is inside the bread. What is visible is the part of the mold body that produces the mold spores only. Health effects and mold. Let's go over many topics about health effects and mold. Symptoms, infections, mycotoxins, ODTS and HP, PPE, personal protection gear, and contaminants. Inhalation exposure to mold indoors can cause health effects in some people. Molds produce allergens. These are substances that can cause allergic reactions. Molds produce irritants, and in some cases potentially toxic substances or chemicals called mycotoxins. Inhaling or touching mold or mold spores may cause allergic reactions in sensitive individuals. Mold does not have to be alive to cause an allergic reaction. Dead or alive, mold can cause allergic reactions in some people. There are different types of people who can be affected by mold more severely and sooner than others. They are infants, children, the elderly, individuals with respiratory conditions and sensitivities such as allergies and asthma, persons having weakened immune systems, for example, people with HIV infection, chemotherapy patients, organ transplant recipients. Sensitive people should avoid areas that are likely to have mold, such as compost piles, cut grass, and wooded areas. Allergic reactions to mold in buildings do occur for many sensitive people. However, there is no conclusive evidence that proves mold in a building directly causes human health illness. More research is needed. Mold research is continuous. Mold-related exposure and human health is a complex and emerging science. Symptoms of mold exposure. There are many symptoms of mold exposure. Current evidence indicates that allergies are the types of diseases most often associated with mold. An allergic reaction is the most common symptom that could include wheezing and difficulty in breathing. Inhalation of fungal spores, fragments, parts, or metabolites, mycotoxins, and volatile organic compounds form a wide variety of fungi that may lead to or exacerbate immunologic or allergic reactions, cause toxic effects, and even cause infections. Repeated or single exposure to mold or mold spores or mold fragments may cause non-sensitive individuals to become sensitive to mold, and repeated mold exposure has the potential to increase sensitivity. Allergic responses include hay fever-like symptoms such as headaches, sneezing, runny nose, red eye, dermatitis, general skin rash. Molds can cause asthma attacks in people with asthma who are allergic to mold. Fungi in buildings may cause or exacerbate symptoms of allergies, especially in persons who have a history of allergic diseases such as asthma and retinitis. In addition, molds can cause irritation in the eyes, skin, nose, throat, lungs of individuals, whether or not they are allergic to mold. Other symptoms include nasal and sinus congestions, burning, watery eyes, red eyes, sore throat, dry cough. These and other symptoms may be associated with exposure to mold. But all of these symptoms may be caused by other exposures or conditions unrelated to mold growth at all. Therefore, it's important not to assume that whenever any of these symptoms occurs, mold is the cause. The effects of mold can be acute or chronic. An acute effect is immediate, severe reaction to a large exposure. A chronic effect may take days, months, years to manifest. Usually comes from small, repeated exposures. If a person experiences these symptoms only when occupying a particular building, then that person may be possibly experiencing symptoms of mold exposure. There are 4 important indoor allergenic molds. They are Penicillium, Aspergillus, Cladosporium, and Alternaria. Alternaria and Cladosporium are outdoor molds that can be found indoors if the windows and doors of the building are left open and the spores are carried in by air currents. For more detailed information about mold and health effects to mold exposure, consult a professional, healthcare professional. You may also wish to consult your state or local health department. As a certified mold inspector, you should not give advice, medical advice, to your clients. People with health problems that may be related to mold exposure should seek a physician trained in occupational, environmental, or allergy medicine. Tell your client to consult with a healthcare provider regarding any health problems that they might be experiencing. Infections. Only a small group of fungi have been associated with infectious disease. Aspergillosis is an infectious disease that can occur in immune-suppressed persons. Health effects in this population can be severe. People with chronic lung illnesses, such as obstructive lung disease, may develop mold infections in their lungs. Several species of Aspergillus are known to cause aspergillosis. The most common is Aspergillus fumigatus. Exposure to this common mold, even to high concentrations, is unlikely to cause infections to a healthy person. Breathing in mold may also cause hypersensitivity pneumonitis, an uncommon disease that resembles bacterial pneumonia. In addition, mold exposure may result in opportunistic infections in persons whose immune systems are weakened or suppressed. Exposure to fungi associated with bird droppings and bat droppings, histoplasma and cryptococcus, can lead to health effects, usually transient flu-like illnesses in healthy individuals. Severe health effects are primarily encountered in immune-compromised persons. Mycotoxins. As molds grow, some, but not all, of them may produce potentially toxic byproducts called mycotoxins under some conditions. Some of these molds are commonly found in moisture-damaged buildings. Exposure to mycotoxins can occur from inhalation, ingestion, and skin contact. More than 200 mycotoxins from common molds have been identified, and many more still remain to be identified. The amount and types of mycotoxins produced by a particular mold depends on many environmental and genetic factors. No one can tell if a particular mold is producing mycotoxins simply by looking at it. Contaminants. Although mold is frequently found in damp buildings, it is not the only potential contaminant. Biological contaminants other than mold and non-biological contaminants are often present and may also cause health effects. Damp buildings attract rodents and other pests. Damp or wet building components and furnishings may release chemicals indoors. Potential contaminants in damp or wet buildings include bacteria, dust mites, cockroaches, other pests, as well as chemicals emitted by damp building materials and furnishings.